London's autumn sky carried a soft silver glow, the kind that wrapped the city in a quiet sense of anticipation. The leaves outside Buckingham Palace rustled gently as the royal staff moved through the corridors with their usual composure. Yet, inside the palace walls, something unusual was brewing. For the first time in modern history, an American courtroom icon, Judge Judy had been invited to host a special international podcast episode from within the palace itself. When her team received the invitation, everyone assumed it was a misunderstanding. Judge Judy looked up from her reading glasses. Buckingham Palace? My podcast? What on earth would the king want from me? Her producer, Malik Rivers, checked the email again. It's real, Judy. His Majesty's Communications Office sent it. They want you to host a special conversation, apparently something meaningful. Something personal. Judy narrowed her eyes. Kings don't do personal. They do formal. Diplomatic. Carefully crafted speeches written by people with fancy titles. Malik shrugged. Well, maybe he wants something different this time. But deep down, even Judge Judy felt something strange. Why her? Why now? 2 days later, Judy's plane touched down at Heathrow Airport. Reporters tried to snag photos, but her security team pushed gently through the crowd. As she stepped into her car, she looked at Malik. I swear, if this is some prank, you're going to be filing paperwork for the next 10 years. Malik laughed. Relax, Judy. This is history in the making. But inside, both of them were uncertain. The palace had never collaborated with a podcast before, especially not one hosted by a New York judge famous for her sharp tongue and zero tolerance for nonsense. As they approached the palace gates, Judge Judy rolled down her window. The grandeur of the courtyard stunned even her unshakable demeanor. Guards stood perfectly still in their iconic red uniforms. Flags fluttered. The palace gleamed like a scene from a royal painting. A young aide approached. Your Honor, His Majesty is expecting you. Please follow me. Judge Judy smirked. Your Honor? Haven't heard that outside a courtroom in years. The aide smiled nervously, unsure whether she was joking. They were escorted into the white drawing room, one of the palace's most elegant chambers. Golden chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls of light. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, each painted with royal seriousness. But the man standing near the window wasn't the formal, guarded king the world always saw. King Charles III looked thoughtful. Almost uneasy. He approached with a warm smile. Judge Judy. Thank you for accepting my invitation. I realize it must have seemed rather odd. Judy straightened her posture. Odd? Let's just say I've received parking tickets that made more sense. The king chuckled softly. Yes, your reputation precedes you. But soon the humor faded, replaced by quiet sincerity. Judge, he said, I want to record a conversation with you. Not a statement. Not a speech. A conversation. One that may help clear certain misconceptions circulating around the world. Judy's eyebrows rose. Your Majesty, I don't do scripted PR pieces. If you want fluff, I'm not your woman. He shook his head. No fluff. I want honesty. Authenticity. The world has enough speeches. What it lacks is understanding. Something shifted in Judy's eyes. Authenticity. Understanding. Words she valued. But she still asked, why me? The king looked out the window, his voice softer. Because you are known for your clarity. Your fairness. And your ability to speak truth without fear. I cannot think of anyone better suited for what I want to discuss. She studied him carefully. And what do you want to discuss, Your Majesty? He paused. Then spoke quietly. Islam. Judge Judy blinked. Islam? Yes, he said. And the truth about it, truth that has been overshadowed by decades of fear, stereotypes, and sensationalism. I want to speak about what I've seen, learned, and admired. But I need someone who can handle such a conversation responsibly. Judge Judy folded her arms. King Charles, are you asking to make a shocking statement about Islam? He smiled gently. Perhaps not shocking, but honest. Deeply honest. This wasn't a political agenda. This wasn't a religious debate. This was a man wanting to talk about respect, understanding, and humanity. And Judy could sense that. She nodded slowly. All right, Your Majesty. Let's do your conversation. No filters. No theatrics. Just truth. The palace staff arranged a temporary podcast set in one of the grand libraries. Rich wooden shelves towered behind them. Soft lighting illuminated the table. Microphones were adjusted. Cameras checked. Judge Judy sat on one side. King Charles on the other. But before recording, Judy asked. Why now? Why suddenly? What made you want to talk about Islam? The king leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. Because silence can sometimes create distance. And distance can create fear. I've spent years meeting people from all faiths, Muslim communities included. And I've learned more than most assume. Judy raised a brow. Such as? He smiled faintly. We'll get to that. But the seriousness returned as he added. Judy, my intention is not to preach. My intention is to represent truth where it has been misunderstood. She nodded. Fair enough. This was not going to be drama. This was not going to be controversy. This was going to be humanity. And for the first time in her career, Judy felt something rare, nervous anticipation. The red light blinked. Malik, behind the camera, whispered. We're live. Judy cleared her throat. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a special episode of the Judge Judy podcast. Today, I'm sitting with someone the world knows very well, His Majesty, King Charles III. The king inclined his head politely. Thank you, Judge Judy. A pleasure to be here. Judy continued. Your Majesty, you've asked for this episode, not to discuss politics, not to discuss the crown, but to talk about Islam. Why? The king took a deep breath. And then spoke the sentence that would later shake social media. Because the world often misunderstands that which it does not take the time to learn. Judge Judy leaned forward slightly. And you've taken the time? Yes, the king replied softly. 4 decades. Quietly. Privately. And sincerely. The room fell silent. Cameras recorded. History, though fictional in our story, was being crafted. King Charles continued. When I was much younger, long before I ever imagined becoming monarch, I met a Muslim historian at a cultural event. He spoke to me not as a prince, but as a boy curious about the world. Judy listened carefully. He told me something I never forgot. The king smiled faintly. He said, Your Highness, the world becomes peaceful the moment we stop believing we already know everything. Judy tilted her head. That's good advice. It was, the king agreed. It made me realize how much depth there is in cultures, faiths, and traditions that we often oversimplify. Judy asked, "And Islam? What did you learn?" The king's eyes softened. "A great deal. I learned about hospitality, generosity, the emphasis on charity, the importance of peace, true peace, not the kind often lost in news headlines." Judge Judy leaned her elbows on the table. "So your shocking statement is really an attempt to open a door to understanding?" "Yes," he said. "A door that has been locked for far too long." Meanwhile, outside the palace, the world didn't know the details yet. But the news that Judge Judy and King Charles were recording something together had already leaked. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube trending, TikTok clips. Everyone was speculating. What are they talking about? Is it about the monarchy? Why Judge Judy of all people? Is this a legal matter? Is it a cultural issue? Nobody guessed the truth. Not yet. And certainly not what the king would say next. Back in the library, the king sat upright. "Judge Judy, let me tell you something I've never said publicly." She leaned in. "I once spent several hours inside a small Islamic center in Birmingham, unannounced, unpublicized, and without media. I spoke with families, students, teachers." "What did you find?" Judy asked. The king paused. What he said next struck the entire room silent. "I found more kindness in that modest community than I have sometimes found in gilded halls." Judge Judy stared at him, genuinely taken aback. "That's powerful." The king nodded. "That is why I wanted this conversation. People deserve to know that humanity exists far beyond the labels we give each other." For a moment after King Charles spoke, Judge Judy didn't say a word. Not because she was confused, but because she was processing the weight of what he had just revealed. A king, one of the most scrutinized figures on earth, visiting a small Islamic center without media, without security cameras, without headlines? It didn't fit the usual royal narrative. "So," Judy said finally, tapping her pen lightly on the table, "you walked in without telling them who you were?" The king smiled, amused. "Well, I wasn't exactly invisible. A few people recognized me. But once they realized I was simply there to listen, not make a spectacle, they welcomed me like family." Judge Judy raised an eyebrow. "Family? That's a powerful word, Your Majesty." "Yes," he replied softly. "Because that's how I felt. They didn't treat me like a king. They treated me like a guest. A human being. And sometimes that is the greatest honor anyone can receive." Judy's expression softened, just a little. She wasn't someone easily moved, but this was different. "Why haven't you shared this before?" she asked. The king took a slow breath. "Because sincerity often loses its meaning when shouted from rooftops. Some experiences are meant to be understood quietly, until the world is ready to hear them." Behind the cameras, Malik, Judge Judy's producer, felt a sudden heaviness in his chest. Not fear. Not discomfort. Something else. Responsibility. This wasn't just a podcast episode. This wasn't entertainment. This was a message that might shape millions of minds. He whispered to the camera operator. "This is going to break the internet." The operator nodded silently, eyes wide. Malik had handled dozens of big interviews, politicians, celebrities, authors, but nothing like this. He kept glancing at Judy, waiting for her famous sharpness to kick in. But she wasn't interrupting. She wasn't arguing. She was listening. And that alone told Malik how extraordinary this moment truly was. Judge Judy leaned back. Let's rewind. You said your understanding of Islam began a long time ago, long before you became king. What exactly sparked it? The king looked thoughtful. Curiosity. But more importantly, contradiction. Contradiction? Judy asked. Yes, he said. When I was young, I would hear people describe Islam in harsh, negative ways. And yet, every time I met Muslim individuals, artists, scholars, community leaders, they contradicted those descriptions entirely. He folded his hands. That contradiction made me question the narratives I had been hearing. Judy nodded. That's the problem with stereotypes. They're often loudest where truth is quietest. The king gave a small, appreciative smile. That is precisely why I'm speaking up now. Because somewhere between conviction and curiosity lies understanding. The king continued. There was a moment I've never shared publicly. During a visit to Istanbul many years ago, my schedule was packed with diplomatic meetings. But I slipped away, just for half an hour, to walk through an old market. Judy smirked. You? Escaping your royal schedule? That itself is shocking. He chuckled. Guilty as charged. He went on. I stumbled upon a small tea house. Very modest. I sat down, and a man, perhaps in his 70s, brought me tea before I even asked. When I offered to pay, he placed his hand on his heart and said, "You are my guest." The king's voice grew soft, distant. In that simple gesture, I understood something profound. Hospitality is not about wealth, it is about heart. Judge Judy nodded. That's something people forget. It stayed with me, the king said. Years later, when I visited Muslim communities in the UK, I saw the same tradition, the same warmth, the same sincerity. As the king spoke, Judy found herself observing him differently. This wasn't a man trying to impress the world. This wasn't politician speak. This was a human being recounting memories that had shaped his worldview. And Judy, despite her famously sharp exterior, appreciated honesty when she heard it. What you're describing, she said, isn't what most people hear in the news. The king nodded, almost sadly. Yes. And that is precisely the tragedy. The majority of people, Muslim or not, simply want peace. They want safety. They want community. But fear has a louder microphone than kindness. Judy crossed her arms. Well, Your Majesty, you're sitting in front of a pretty loud microphone yourself right now. He laughed gently. Yes. And I intend to use it responsibly. During a short break between recordings, Judy walked around the library. The walls were lined with centuries of literature, philosophy, science, history. The king's aide, Amelia, approached her quietly. Ma'am, His Majesty wanted you to see this. She handed Judy a small book. It was worn, the pages slightly faded. What's this? Judy asked. A poetry collection. Translations of classical Islamic poetry. He's had it for decades. Judy flipped through the pages. It was filled with handwritten notes, reflections, interpretations, questions. Judy raised her eyebrows. He reads this? Amelia nodded. He studies it. Judge Judy felt something stir inside her. Kings were expected to know politics, diplomacy, history, but poetry? Islamic poetry? That was a different level of curiosity. As Judy returned to her seat, she looked at the king with a new kind of respect. When the cameras rolled again, Judy asked, "Your Majesty, if I may be blunt, many people think world leaders don't understand ordinary communities. They say people in power are too distant, too sheltered, too privileged. What do you say to that?" The king didn't dodge the question. "They are often right," he said plainly. Judy blinked. She wasn't expecting that answer. But, he continued, distance is not always a choice. Sometimes it is a condition imposed by circumstance. The challenge is to bridge it, not ignore it. He leaned forward slightly. "That is why I spent time visiting communities quietly, without cameras. To bridge the gap, even if only by a few steps." Judy nodded slowly. "That's rare. Most public figures prefer the camera." The king smiled sadly. "Yes. But cameras capture faces, not understanding." Judy shuffled her notes and pulled out a printed letter she had been given by her team. "Your Majesty, we received something before this interview began. A letter from a former soldier. He said he once saw you stop in the middle of a royal visit to talk with a Muslim family who had lost their home." The king's eyes softened. "Yes. I remember them." "Why did you stop?" Judy asked. The king replied, "Because grief recognizes grief. Loss is not defined by religion." He hesitated, then added, "That family reminded me that compassion is not a gesture of royalty, it is a requirement of humanity." Judge Judy didn't respond immediately. Even she felt the heaviness of that sentence. Judy leaned forward again. "Your Majesty, the world always waits for big words. Big statements. People want something surprising. Something headline-worthy. Do you have such a statement today?" The king took a slow, deliberate breath. Then he looked directly into the camera and said, "If the world understood Islam the way I have come to understand it, quietly, personally, humanly, fear would lose its voice." Malik nearly dropped his headphones. The camera operator mouthed a silent wow. Judge Judy sat frozen for a moment. Finally, she exhaled. "Well, that's quite a statement, Your Majesty." He nodded humbly. "It is not meant to shock. Only to remind." Judy smirked. "Oh, trust me, it's going to shock people anyway." Judy crossed her legs and studied him. "Your Majesty, forgive the bluntness, but people may say you're romanticizing. That you're ignoring real problems. How do you respond to that?" The king didn't flinch. "I respond by saying this: every community, every faith, every nation has challenges. Islam is no exception. But focusing on the flaws while ignoring the beauty is like judging a book by its torn pages instead of its story." Judge Judy looked impressed. "That's poetic." He laughed softly. "Perhaps. But sometimes truth is easier to hear when wrapped in poetry." Outside the palace, media vans were lining up. News channels were speculating wildly. Sources say the king discussed a sensitive cultural topic. Judge Judy seen entering palace. What is happening? Royal staff refusing to comment. Social media hashtags began trending worldwide. Hashtag Judge Judy at the palace. Hashtag Royal podcast. Hashtag What did the king say? Nobody knew the details. But the world could feel something big was coming. The next morning, London woke beneath a quiet, pearly sky. Fog drifted over the Thames like slow-moving thoughts. Buses hummed through Westminster. The palace staff walked briskly in polished hallways, preparing for another day of royal responsibilities. But inside the king's private library, the atmosphere was entirely different, dense, thoughtful, as if the walls themselves anticipated something extraordinary. Judge Judy sat in a high-backed chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Across from her, King Charles set down a porcelain cup of tea and inhaled deeply, gathering his composure. The cameras had not yet started rolling. The boom mic hovered silently above them. Even Emma, the producer, didn't dare interrupt the stillness. Something important was coming. Judy noticed it immediately. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "you look like a man preparing to open a locked door." The king smiled faintly. "Perhaps I am." He leaned forward, elbows on the polished table. "Yesterday," he continued, "I spoke about my visit to that small Islamic center in Birmingham. But there is something I didn't share. Something that changed the way I understood responsibility, faith, and leadership." Judy nodded. "I'm listening." The king took a breath that shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. "It was nearly 20 years ago," King Charles began, "before anyone imagined I would become king. I was traveling quietly, no press, no entourage. I wanted to understand communities that leaders often speak about without truly knowing." He paused, eyes drifting to the window as though replaying the scene in his mind. "I found myself in the prayer hall. It was peaceful. The calligraphy on the walls, the gentle murmur of children learning, the sound of pages turning. It was the closest thing to silence I had ever heard." Judy smiled at the poetic imagery. "You speak like someone who saw more than the surface." "That's precisely it," the king replied. "I wasn't there to observe. I was there to understand." And then came the moment that shaped everything. "A young boy approached me," he said. "He must have been 12, maybe 13. He held a book in his hands, worn from reading. He looked nervous, like he'd gathered all his courage to speak." Judy leaned in. "What did he say?" "He said, 'Sir, people think we are very different. But we just want to be good.'" The room fell silent. Even the sound engineer froze. The king continued, his voice soft but steady. "That sentence stayed with me for decades. A child, barely a teenager, summarized the entire struggle of humanity in one line: we just want to be good." He let the words settle, heavy with meaning. Judy swallowed. "That's powerful." "It was more than powerful," the king said. "It was clarifying." He lifted his chin slightly, as a king does when speaking truth. "That day, I realized something. Something I have never spoken publicly. Something I believe the world forgets far too often." Judy's eyes narrowed, not out of skepticism but anticipation. "And what is that?" she asked. Charles detailed it with almost photographic clarity. The children sat in a circle. They were reading a story from classical Islamic poetry. One of the boys, tiny fellow, hair sticking in every direction, was struggling. You could see it in his eyes. Judy leaned forward. "What happened?" The teacher asked him to take his time. No pressure. No embarrassment. And the boy, after stumbling through the first few lines, finally got it right. He paused. I saw the pride on his face. The quiet encouragement on hers. The small celebration in the room. And I realized, kindness is taught, but compassion is lived. Judy nodded slowly. That's universal, she said. Any classroom. Any culture. Exactly, Charles replied. And that's when it happened. The king inhaled deeply, eyes brightening with memory. I was about to leave when the teacher walked up to me. She lowered her voice and said something I'll never forget. What did she say? Judy whispered. She said, "You saw us yesterday. Today, let us see you." The room froze. Even the sound engineer looked up from his console. Judy's eyebrows lifted. That's bold. It was, the king said. But it was honest. She didn't want a royal speech or a polite handshake. She wanted something real. And what did you do? The king smiled softly. I sat down on the carpet with the children. Judy's mouth fell open. You? On the floor? It was surprisingly comfortable, he teased. But more importantly, it was grounding. There was a small girl, Charles continued, about 7. She looked at me with this serious, unblinking expression, as if she could see straight through titles and crowns. What did she say? Judy asked. She asked, "Sir, do important people ever get scared?" Judy felt the air go thin for a moment. What did you tell her? She asked quietly. I said, yes. Every day. He paused. And she smiled and said, then you're just like us. Judy looked down, speechless. That, the king said, was the exact second I understood something profound. People do not fear leaders. They fear distance. Remove the distance, and you find connection. The king leaned back, speaking with clarity and emotion. Islam wasn't the shock, he said. The shock was discovering that the people I had been told were different were simply familiar. Judy nodded. That's what humanity is. Precisely. And when I left that center, I made a promise to myself, quietly, privately, not as a prince, not as a king, but as a man. He looked straight into the camera. That no matter where I went, mosques, churches, synagogues, temples, or community halls, I would enter as a listener first. Suddenly, Emma's phone buzzed sharply. She glanced at the screen, her eyes widening. It's the press, she whispered. They know something is happening here. Someone leaked that you're recording a podcast. Judy sighed. Well, that didn't take long. The king smiled calmly. It's all right, he said. Let them wait. Truth doesn't rush. Emma approached quietly. Should we stop the recording for safety? Charles shook his head. No. Continue. His voice was firm, not commanding, but resolute. This conversation, he said, needs to be finished. Judy smiled, admiration clear in her eyes. Well then, she said, turning back to him, let's continue. What happened after you left the center? Judy asked. The king leaned forward again. That, he said, is where the story takes a surprising turn. Judy tilted her head. Oh. Another one? Yes, Charles said. As I stepped outside, the teacher, Miriam, ran after me. She handed me a sealed envelope. What was in it? Judy asked. The king's expression turned thoughtful. A message. A request. And a truth I was not prepared to hear. Judy's pulse quickened at the tension. And what did it say? Charles exhaled slowly. I will share that in the next part. Judy slapped her palm on the table. Your Majesty, you're worse than the cliffhangers on my show. He laughed. It's a story, Judith. Stories must breathe. The room felt charged, as if every molecule of air had paused to listen. King Charles rested his fingertips on the table. The sealed envelope he mentioned a moment ago hovered over the conversation like a shadow waiting for a shape. Judge Judy leaned in, narrowing her eyes the way she does right before delivering a verdict. "All right, Your Majesty," she said, "no more cliffhangers." "What was in that envelope?" Charles inhaled, slow and steady. "That envelope," he said, "contained a message that challenged everything I understood about leadership and about myself." The cameras hummed softly. Emma froze behind the monitor. The hall outside had grown louder, the press gathering, talking, speculating. But inside, just silence. And anticipation, the king continued, his voice measured. The envelope was handwritten. No royal formality. Just my name. She'd written, to the man, not the prince. Judy's eyebrows lifted. "That's bold, again." "She was a bold woman," he replied. He smoothed the table with his palm as if laying out the memory. "I opened the letter on the train back to London. It read, 'If you truly want to understand people, don't study them, sit with them. Listen without preparing an answer. Watch without judging. You do not need to protect us from ignorance. Help the ignorant learn to see.'" Judy let out a slow exhale. "That's profound." "The final line stayed with me," he said softly. It said, "Leadership is not the crown. It is the courage to remove it when humanity calls." Even the crew fell silent. Judy pressed a hand against her chest, moved. "That," she said quietly, "is one of the finest definitions of leadership I've ever heard." Charles nodded gently. "It was the first time," he said, "that I realized humility is not the opposite of leadership. It is its foundation." Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, firm, urgent. Emma hurried to open it only slightly. A palace aide whispered something. Emma's face tightened. "What's happening?" Judy asked. "They're reporting outside," Emma murmured, "that His Majesty is revealing something major about Islam. The headlines are already being drafted." Judy scoffed. "Of course they are. They don't even know what he's saying." "I expected this," Charles said calmly. "Misunderstanding travels faster than truth." "Do you want to stop?" Emma asked. He shook his head. "No. If anything, now is exactly when we continue." Judy gave a warm, approving smile. "Then let's finish this." Judy folded her arms. "Your Majesty, the world is going to hear this podcast. What do you want them to understand? What is the shocking part of all this?" The king leaned slightly closer. His voice shifted, not louder, not dramatic, but clearer, almost crystalline in its sincerity. "The shocking truth," he said, "is not about Islam. It's about us." Judy blinked. "Go on." Charles held her gaze. "It is shocking how quickly people assume difference, and how slowly they extend understanding." He raised his hand gently, as though outlining a truth in the air. "I learned that compassion does not require shared belief. It requires shared humanity." Judy nodded slowly. "That's something the world forgets. And it is something," the king continued, "that leaders rarely say out loud. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's easy to misunderstand." He took a breath. "So let me say it clearly. People of every faith, including Islam, deserve to be understood before they are judged. That is not a political stance. It is not a religious stance. It is a human stance." Judy sat back, visibly moved. "That," she said softly, "may be the most important sentence ever spoken in this room." Before Charles could respond, the door swung open wider. A senior aide stepped in, partially frantic. "Your Majesty," the press insists on a statement. Rumors are spreading. They're assuming you're making an official declaration. Charles stood slowly, his posture composed. This is not a declaration, he said firmly. It is a conversation. The aide hesitated. Judy stood as well, adding her authority. And conversations, she said, are exactly what the world needs more of. The aide nodded and stepped back, closing the door gently. Charles returned to his chair. There is one last part one haven't told, he said. The part that truly stayed with me. Judy rested her hands, ready. The week after my visit to Birmingham, he continued, I received another letter. This time from the boy, the same one who told me, we just want to be good. Judy smiled gently. What did he say? The king reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded, worn piece of paper. He opened it. The handwriting was uneven, hopeful. It said, Thank you for listening to us. Grown-ups don't always do that. If you ever feel sad, remember, we are praying for everyone to be good, even you. Judy's throat tightened. That child had more wisdom than most adults. Charles nodded. That letter reminded me that goodness is not rare. It is simply quieter than anger. Judy straightened her notes, though she didn't need them. Your Majesty, she said as the camera closed in, if you had one message to leave our audience with, just one, what would it be? The king smiled, soft, human, sincere. That understanding, he said, is the bridge that saves us from ourselves. He paused. And that every community, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, and beyond, is simply trying to find dignity in a world that forgets to give it. The room grew warm with silence. Judy nodded. That, she said, is a message worth hearing. Emma signaled. Camera off. Audio off. Recording complete, Judy stood up and stretched. You realize, she said, that people are going to take pieces of this conversation and twist them. Yes, Charles replied. But that's their story. We just told ours. He offered his hand. Judy shook it firmly. Thank you, Your Majesty, she said. For the honesty. Thank you, he replied, for the space to speak it. They walked out of the room together. The press swarmed, but the king lifted a gentle hand, silencing them with grace rather than authority. No statements today, he told them. Just understanding. Weeks later, back at the palace, Charles received a small package. No name. No return address. Inside was a drawing. A classroom. Children. A figure that looked suspiciously like a king sitting on the carpet with them. And beneath it, in a child's handwriting, we are all just trying to be good. Charles smiled. Some truths do not fade. Some truths echo forever. Weeks later, back at the palace, Charles received a small package. No name. No return address. Inside was a drawing. A classroom. Children. A figure that looked suspiciously like a king sitting on the carpet with them. And beneath it, in a child's handwriting, we are all just trying to be good. Charles smiled. Some truths do not fade. Some truths echo forever. The evening sun was slowly folding itself behind the hills, leaving behind trails of gold that shimmered through the tall pine trees. The air carried that familiar earthy scent, pine mixed with the chill of the mountains. It was the same scent I fell in love with the first day I visited this place, the scent that convinced me to buy a villa on this quiet hillside. Yes, I bought a villa. And not for myself. For my husband, Arjun. I am Anaya, an interior artist whose name appears in design magazines more often than I care to admit. People think success brings clarity, joy, and control. But success only builds walls. Inside those walls, nobody sees the slow, silent cracks. For months, something in my marriage felt off. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a quiet shift, like a door slowly closing. Arjun had changed. Late-night meetings. A second phone with a password I wasn't allowed to know. Weekend work trips. His laughter, no longer mine to hear. And then, the final blow. A video, sent to me by an unknown number. Arjun in a car. A woman beside him. Her face blurred, but her laughter, crystal clear. That laughter stabbed deeper than any betrayal. And that video led me here, inside the villa I bought, waiting for Arjun on the night he planned to work on a business retreat. But I wasn't waiting alone. On the sofa across from me sat a man with storm-filled eyes. Kabir. The one who sent me the video. Not a stranger anymore. But the husband of the woman Arjun was cheating with. His wife's name was Ria. Our spouses were about to walk into this villa together, unaware that both of us were already here. It was almost poetic. Cruel, but poetic. The room was silent except for the ticking of the wooden wall clock. My palms were sweating. Kabir hadn't spoken for several minutes. He stared at the floor with clenched jaw, grief and fury wrestling inside him. Finally, I broke the silence. Are you sure they'll come here tonight? Kabir slowly lifted his gaze, his eyes sharp. Yes, he said. Their messages mentioned this exact address. Same time. Same plan. His voice didn't shake. But his hands did. I poured Kabir a glass of water. He didn't drink it. He just kept looking at the door like he expected the betrayal to walk in early. This place is beautiful, Kabir finally said, trying to breathe normally. You bought it alone? Yes, I replied. Arjun doesn't know. I was planning to surprise him. Make this a place for us to heal. Or restart. Kabir's lips curved in a bitter smile. And instead, this became the place where you'll break. His honesty stung. But it wasn't wrong. They think the villa is empty, I said. Arjun told me he'd be at a hotel tonight. So, they'll be comfortable. Unafraid. Unfiltered. Kabir nodded. Good. I want to see their real faces. Not the ones they wear at home. Silence again. A painful, heavy silence. Kabir finally asked, will you forgive him? I stared at him. Forgiveness sounded like a foreign language. I don't know, I said softly. But tonight, I want the truth. Whatever it is. Kabir exhaled deeply, closing his eyes for a second. I don't know if I'll forgive Ria either, he said. I just want to stop feeling stupid. That sentence broke something inside me. Because I understood exactly what he meant. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no anger in his eyes, only exhaustion. We don't deserve this, he whispered. We don't, I agreed. We sat quietly after that, two strangers connected by the same wound, waiting for the same earthquake. Outside, the night thickened. The villa lights made long shadows on the wooden floor. Kabir stood and moved to the window. I joined him. The driveway was empty. But not for long. At exactly 8 p.m., the distant hum of an engine sliced through the silence of the hills. Kabir straightened instantly. I pulled the curtain aside. A black SUV approached slowly, its headlights cutting through the long stretch of darkness. It rolled to a stop right in front of the villa. My heart slammed against my ribs. Kabir's fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The driver's door opened. Arjun stepped out. He looked like the man I once fell in love with, sharp jawline, neatly folded sleeves, hair slightly tousled by the wind. But there was something else on his face today. Happiness. A happiness he hadn't shown me in months. That alone was enough to break me a little. And then, the passenger door opened. A woman stepped out. Rhea. Pretty, in a delicate soft way. The type of woman who smiles without effort, who laughs freely, who looks untouched by sorrow. Her hair was messy from the ride. Her lipstick slightly smudged. She looked comfortable. Too comfortable. Arjun walked beside her, smiling in a way that made my stomach sink. "Let's go inside," Arjun said to her, his voice soft. "No one comes here. We'll have the whole weekend to ourselves. No one comes here. No one." The words tasted like poison. Kabir inhaled sharply, pain flashing in his eyes. Arjun reached into his pocket for the villa key, my villa's key, and approached the door. He had no idea I was on the other side. As he inserted the key, Kabir and I stepped out into the porch light. Arjun froze. Rhea stopped breathing. Their faces turned pale, almost ghostly. The betrayal, the lies, the secret, they all collapsed in a single moment. And with a calmness I didn't recognize in myself, I finally spoke. "Welcome to my villa, Arjun."